President Trump has appointed Vice President Vance to remove from the Smithsonian Institute the anti-American improper ideology. What is that? It's over. The empire is on its way down. In that moment, Donald Trump says, I'm going to take back the Panama Canal. I'm going to take Greenland away from Denmark. I'm going to take Canada away from the Canadian. When your country is falling apart, one of the ways you hold it together is to go on a crusade. And the working class is hit in too many ways. It's upset, it's angry, it doesn't see a way out. That's a description of the German working class. That's why it went with Hitler.
Today, I would like to talk about the decline of the American empire. This is a very provocative question, but first I want to say, whether you love Trump or hate Trump, though this more applies to people who hate Trump, I think it's just absolutely ridiculous to say that he's Hitler or he's as bad as Hitler when you look at what Hitler did versus what Trump has done. It's just crazy.
Agreed.
I still think it's a very interesting historical exercise to ask what parallels you see between Trump and Hitler as people, maybe in their rises to power, their regimes.
That's not the kind of reasoning I do. It's just, I don't believe in anything. It makes no sense to me. What's interesting is not these individuals. Neither of them.
Because Trump is irrelevant, as we spoke about before.
Yeah, it's the situation. What he does is made by his circumstances, not by him. He is really, in a long chain of causation, he's the last step. He's not the first step. He's not even in the middle. He's trying to cope with 27 pressures coming in at him in different ways. And if I knew more about him, I might make an educated guess which way he's going to go. But I don't. I'm not about to know him. I don't even care very much. I'm interested in the forces and how they are pushing him. Which way he finally goes, I can't know, and it's kind of idle speculation. The reason the German story is important is it gives you some sense of some of the pressures he's under. You've got a working class here that is very shocked. No one prepared them. That's a flaw of this culture, which of course no one is allowed to say. No one prepared them that there is an empire, that the empire is going to decline. Why? Because every empire in the world has. And do you really want to bet that this one won't? And if it might, could it be now? Could we? We cannot have that conversation. We just had a presidential election in which neither candidate said a word like that. Not Trump, not Biden, not Harris, not declining empire. Us? Who? Me? Not at all. They all talk as though we're deciding on doing it. We're the United States and we're making decisions. Look at Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, in a world in which probably it is fair to say the overwhelming majority of people are coming out of a century or two of colonialism, hating it, wanting it to disappear. Anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism is the ethos of the world at this point. Why would a leader now, even the ethos I just described, having attacked Russia for 3 years relentlessly for taking Ukraine, territory in Ukraine, suddenly become the advocate of taking territory? What the hell? What? But now, wait a minute. Now you do have an answer. When your country is falling apart, one of the ways you hold it together is to go on a crusade. Hitler attacks everybody. It's crazy. How is Germany going to fight Russia, Poland, the West? What are you, nuts? Yeah, afterwards, that's how we talk. But at the time, he's solving problems. Step by step, and his rationale is kind of, if you look at it honestly, I don't like it, or obviously, most of my family was killed by the fellow, not his part. But I understand what he was doing. I understand what Mr. Trump is doing. I think the usefulness of the exercise is to learn something from understanding it, to be more strategically adept at avoiding the worst outcome. Hitler, Trump is no Hitler. I got that. I agree with you about that. But he's under pressures that in one case led in that direction, and there are sure as hell signs that in this case, there are also some of them leading in that direction. Will they be strong enough? Will they engender a counter reaction? Who knows? Germany at the time Hitler takes power had extremely well organized, very powerful left wing. Half the country were in the socialist or communist parties. These were parties that had armed detachments to fight in the streets, and they were disciplined in many ways, particularly the Communist Party of Germany. Our left is out to lunch. There are no organizations even remotely comparable. Is it therefore easier for fascism to come here? In some ways, you bet. You bet. If and when Mr. Trump, he hasn't done it yet, but if and when Mr. Trump were to mobilize his partisans, the Proud Boys, folks like that, put them in a uniform, the way that Hitler did, and have them terrorize anybody who has a meeting, to get rid of the un-American, improper ideology. Now it's a Smithsonian. Tomorrow it'll be what? A rally in Times Square? We already are picking up people whose crime seems to have been that they participated in anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian activities at various universities. The universities are caving, giving the names to the police, abetting the whole process. Colombia, beyond words. Okay, those are signs. I think it is as inappropriate to equate Hitler to Trump as it is not to see that Trump is under very similar pressures and is making some similar moves. That's as much as it's reasonable to say, but it's unreasonable to deny that. I wish it weren't the case. Secretary of State Rubio made a speech yesterday in which he made it clear, I'm boasting. 300 foreign students, that was the number he gave, have been expelled from the United States, have had their visas canceled or withdrawn. People in the middle of their PhD studying such revolutionary topics as, oceanography and so forth. But it turns out that they wrote an article about genocide in Gaza or something like that. Jesus, it's interesting. It's interesting that people who come here and participate in nonviolent, perfectly legal political expression, which is not an excluded activity by anybody, are now being and that nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. Very few people saying much about it. The Democratic Party is DOA. It's not even there. Mr. Biden seems to have vanished into thin air. Kamala Harris with him. This is for me, by the way, you're heading into the greatest crisis the Democratic Party has had in a long time. The progressive wing of that party, it cannot continue much longer the way it has. And that's, they may not recover. I can't tell you the number of people that have contacted me talking about new parties, third party. I mean, it's off the chart. That doesn't prove or guarantee anything, but it is an interesting phenomena coming out of this situation. And even the Republican Party may not be able to. You can see senators already over this, what are they calling it? Signal gate, are beginning to split inside the Republicans, because those who see this as another Watergate and they want to get on the right side early, and those who don't want to. But here's the punchline, take us back. These are all signs of a declining empire. It's all of this. All of this. Trump as a phenomenon. This is a society that somewhere, in some way, understands that the convenient oscillation of the last 70 years, a Democrat, a Republican, as president, you do your stint and you turn it over to the other one. And the same at the Senate, and the same at the House, and it doesn't make all that much difference. It's enough of a difference, little, that half the people don't bother voting. They don't see any point in it. They don't regret it when they don't vote, because we know 2 years later, 4 years later, they don't vote again. All right? This was a very, the Germans have a wonderful word, gemütlich. I don't know how that translates into English. Gemütlich. Pleasant, comfortable, relaxed, tranquil, words like that. Mr. Trump is the end of that. Mr. Trump had nothing, he didn't come up through the ranks. He didn't learn the political game. He wasn't like so many of you, look at Kamala Harris. She was a DA, she was a senator. She learns. Biden, he was a senator from Delaware, and Bush's were all, Mr. Trump comes out of, what's his skill? He's good at being a playboy in New York City, going to clubs with his father's money. It's charming, it's fine, who cares? But and he's brash, and he says things you're not supposed to, and he acts it. He doesn't fit. That's why he get treated badly, and now he's angry and getting back and revenge against all of it. It's a play. Shakespeare could have written this. It's a play. It's the odd president. But that tells you something. And that is that the system can't go on. That's why when he first starts, he rides down an escalator and tells us all how Mexicans are rapists. What? No politician would do that. That's nuts. But it was the ticket to success. Because everything is different now. And being your reasonable Bush, Clinton, is the same old done fly. And by the way, I can assure you, since I'm closer to the Democratic Party than I am, of course, to the Republican, is that among the Democrats that I talk to, they are more troubled than I've ever seen them. They don't know what to do. And I know people pretty high up in that structure. They really don't know what to do. They know that Bernie is kind of out of the pig. He's too old. But they're coming up, lots of them, all over the place. and they understand that if you look at the voting, if you look at the young people particularly, this has got to go. And especially now, if you look at the economic program that Mr. Trump is putting forward, it's nuts. And you can't, I liken it to this, and by now you have a sense of how my head reasons. The best image for Mr. Trump's economic policy is from football. You know what a Hail Mary pass is? That's his policy. His policy is a Hail Mary pass. It's when the game is nearly lost and you've got only enough seconds for one more play. So you tell your receivers, I want you all to go out and go over in the left-hand corner of the field. Close to the end zone, but not yet. I'm going to heave the ball there. There's going to be 3 of you and 3 defenders, and you're all going to go for the ball. It's going to bounce around, and hopefully it'll come down in your hands, and then we win the game. You fall into the end zone, we're done. That's it. That's where we are.
Why is this his economic policy?
Because nothing else left for him. Let's start with tariffs, right? Tariffs is the number one weapon that he's deploying. Tariffs have been in existence for hundreds of years. The United States has used tariffs at various points in its history since it was independent and could do so. So right after the Revolutionary War, we had the power to do, and we have on occasion done tariffs. Okay, number 1. Number 2, some tariffs were worked out in deals with the rest of the world and have not occasioned a problem because we gave stuff that we could also benefit from. I'll give you an example. In the 1960s, there was a really serious struggle when the United States wanted to levy tariffs on foreign automobiles. Why? Because coming out of World War II, the rebuilding of the German and Japanese economies from World War II destruction led both countries to the same strategy. The best way we can recover from the war is to outdo the number one dominant economy in the world, the United States, and its number one industry at that time, automobiles. If we can't do that, they're going to dominate forever. That's our task, that's our goal, that's our measure of success. Can we produce a better car at a lower price? Enter Volkswagen. By the way, Hitler's project, Volkswagen. Volkswagen in German means the people's car. Toyota, yeah, you know them. You know the Japanese. We all know them now. They started to come in. There was the romance of the VW Beetle, the little round one. And the auto companies went crazy. Detroit, which was our auto center at that time, was the dominant success story of American capitalism. When foreign dignitaries came to Washington, the president would fly with them to Detroit to have them look at Dearborn or look at the Ford plant or the GM plant or the Chrysler plant. Look here look at this technology. Look at the workers, how satisfied they are. Look, we got a significant number of black workers here. See, we're overcoming our racial, and man, it was half bullshit, but half genuine, justified. And there was a horror. Our dominance would be undone because the VW was a better car at a cheaper price. And the Japanese came shortly thereafter. And so a deal was struck. Here's it. We're going to put a tariff, but we won't put it on every car. And we'll put it low on regular cars, but you got to give us one thing. We're going to put a fat tariff. And in exchange, you can put a tariff on some of our agricultural products. Europeans were interested in preserving their agriculture, particularly their chicken production, and Americans are good at making chicken. The chicken is no good, but the cheap price is spectacular. Anyway, long story short, a tariff was attached to the pickup truck. A big one, 25%. Compared to all the other sedan, 2.5%. That tariff has been in effect for half a century. You know why Americans celebrate the pickup truck? Why every He-Man has a pickup truck? Because it's a symbol of masculinity? Not at all. You had to train the American buffoon to want that truck. You know why? Because the profit margin on the truck is way better than the profit margin on a car. And why? Because of the tariff. That's why you don't see very many foreign. The pickup truck that has the name Toyota, that was made here to escape the tariff. It's just, so there's nothing new about it. And therefore there's a literature, many more books than you have on your shelf here about tariffs. It's been it's a segment of every course in international trade ever taught. And I've taught them. The library's full of enormous studies of every tariff there's ever been studied. Did it work? Did it fail? Why did it work? Why did it fail? And here's the conclusion. It'll save you a lot of time. I've done the literature. I've taught the course. We don't know is the answer. The effect of a tariff depends on the context within which it's said. It's a little bit like the phrase, "oh shit." The impact of saying, "oh shit," loudly in a group of people depends on that group, who they are, what they're used to. They'll either be horrified or they'll give it no notice, right? Depends on, that's what a tariff is. So when the president says, "I'm going to do this, I'm going to tariff, it's going to have this result," you're talking to a moron. Somebody who is talking right out of the other end, because has no idea what he's talking about. What will be the effect of the tariff on Canada? I don't know. And I know he doesn't know. Right? It could be, there's the Hail Mary. Could it get him the result he's hoping for? Yeah, when the quarterback heaves the Hail Mary pass, could it be end up caught by his tight end? Possible. Possible. Mr. Trump's policy, if he's luckier than I don't know who, could work out. But as a policy, with his, bravado explaining, it's so pathetically absurd that people like us, and you don't have to be a leftist to understand it. Any half-wit trained economist knows, this is first-year economic class in college stuff, right? He either didn't have it or he's forgotten it. You can't do this. And so I'm here to tell you that the consequences of the tariff could be a serious boost to inflation here. Because remember, a tariff means stuff coming into the country costs more, right? A bag of coffee coming in from Latin America or from Mexico, for example, costs $100, let's say. He's going to put a $25% tariff. You're going to have to pay $100 to get the bag of coffee, plus $25 to Uncle Sam. That's the tariff. It's a tax. Mr. Trump often says that the tariff is paid by the other country. This is wrong. It's not paid by the other country. It's paid by Americans. Nobody else is billed. The United States can't bill another country for a tax. It's not the way the system works. Nigeria cannot bill us for taxes their legislature passes. It's not the way it works. Okay, so now the coffee will cost to the American buyer $125. Let's say the American buyer is a company called Starbucks. They now have to pay 25% more for their single most important input. You know what's going to happen to the price of your latte? The inflation is going to get major worse. Multiply it by not just coffee, but by all the other items. Our biggest trading partners are Mexico and Canada, the two countries hit with 25% tariff. Those are the biggest sources of imports into the United States. So you could have here a sudden shock. The avocado toast that the nice people like to eat, that's going to cost a fortune. The avocados all come from Mexico. In the morning, you have coffee, which I just told you will go up in price, and into it, you put sugar, which is an imported product, which you go up. Welcome to America of $20 for your morning coffee. You think the working class is angry now? Oh, wait. Mr. Trump won the election in part by the antipathy towards the Democrats held accountable for the inflation that we had during the Biden presidency. Mr. Trump really wants to do that now, making himself to blame? Because everybody's going to say it's because of the tariffs, and it'll be largely true. And then we ask the question, what will the objects, the people hurt, and the Mexicans, and let me do Mexico because it's wonderful. It's so horrible, it's wonderful. We are deporting into Mexico more than any other country millions of undocumenteds that are being collected by ICE and sent over the border into Mexico. What's in Mexico for them? Nothing. There are no jobs in Mexico. Not for millions of people suddenly arriving. This is a catastrophe, but we're just beginning. Those millions who are working here in the United States, the millions of Mexicans all around us, they were taking a portion of their weekly salary and sending it back to Mexico for their grandma and their grandpa and their children that they left behind. This was, and I know the numbers, 18% of the GDP, if I'm not mistaken. A huge cash inflow to the Mexican economy. Gone. You return the workers for whom there's no work, and you cut off the source of income, and now you're saying, but you can't export anything to America anymore because we got a tariff against you, and a lot of people aren't going to buy $125 bag of coffee because they'll turn to tea. They're not going. What is Mexico going to do? Where is Mexico? And in Canada, it's different. Canada sells us lumber. We're going to put a 25%. You know what? Nobody can afford to build houses in America now. Add 25% to the cost of lumber, kiss it goodbye. And rents will go. What? Half of this country uses electricity from Canada, the Midwest, brings Canadian electricity because Canada has oil, gas, and can generate masses of. What is Canada going to do with its lumber, with its Oh, I know. There is a place that will buy all the electricity and all the lumber. It's called the People's Republic of China. Having a real competitor for the first time means everybody has options they never had before. So the real effect of Mr. Trump's policies and I haven't even gone through the impact on China or the impact on Europe, and he's throwing tariffs on them too. You could have a concatenation of events in which the unthought through strategy of Mr. Trump doesn't yet take into account that there's another competitor who can buy if you don't, who can sell if you don't. You're not what you were. In the latter half of the 20th century, it all made a kind of sense. The United States says jump, and everybody asks how high. But we're not there. It's over. The empire is on its way down. You can live with that. You can make that decline manageable. You can avoid a trauma, or you cannot. For every example of an empire that went down traumatically, I can give you one that didn't, and vice versa. That's a choice we have if we take it seriously, which our leaders do not. So they're doing this, the retaliation. I mean, Canadians are en masse changing their summer vacation plans to not come to the United States. It's an interesting moment. Why? They're so shaken by all the rhetoric and everything. But that hurts our tourist industry, which is a significant industry in this country. You know, 6 Canadians were planning normally to come to that resort or to be part of the sunbirds that come to Florida in the winter. But they're not coming anymore. You know, and those people in Florida with their, you see, did you see what Mr. DeSantis did? This is another, he's the governor of Florida. He gave a speech 4 days ago in which he said, well, we got a problem here. We're deporting immigrants, but they're the ones who pick the fruits and vegetables upon which the Florida economy depends. But I have a solution. We're changing the law so children can go to work in the fields. That's the end of an empire. That's what happens. And no one says boo. 14-year-olds will now be eligible to work until I think 9 at night. I mean, all kinds of things that the law forbade for children before. We're going to have child labor, and it's going to be good because you see, you can pay your children as little as you got away with paying those immigrants. Jesus Christ. How many symptoms do you want to see before you go to the doctor? How many things are you going to face before you realize you got a different problem than the one you thought you had? And all of this, let me put it to you this way. If everything is going your way, you can afford to make mistakes, misjudgments, you know, because everything is kind of going your way. So, yeah, you forgot to take care of that, but that's happening, and that's good, and that'll kind of compensate for the boo-boo you made, for the mistaken judge. And the problem is, that's true. That is true. And the United States had that for the second half of the 20th century. But now the wind is going the other way. Everything's going down. There's no slack anymore. There's no space. Each mistake now worsens the other one. I'll give a very concrete example. When the United States decided to fight against the Russians about Ukraine, right? It was quickly understood, even before the war started, that Russia has, if not the greatest nuclear weapons in the world, second to the United States, and not a distant second, if it's at all second. Which means nuclear war is out. You couldn't possibly pick a worse choice than Russia to have a nuclear war with. I mean, pick China, pick anybody, you know. Russia's got them, so there's not going to be a nuclear war. The two sides understand that would be crazy. Neither of them cares enough about Ukraine to run such a risk. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that if there's going to be a war, it's a conventional war. Army, Navy, Air Force in a war. Okay. But then you don't want to fight Russia, because Russia has a fantastic record in these kinds of wars. I mean, Napoleon tried and got defeated. And Kaiser Wilhelm tried and got defeated. And Adolf Hitler tried and got the... Do you really want to fight the Russians in an armed conventional war? The United States understood that. They really did. So they came up with the great way to victory: sanctions. Russia's a small economic unit. Russia's dependent on exporting oil and gas. We are the United States, and we have allies, the Europeans, and we're going to say to the Russians, we're going to sanction you. They did. This is the quote I'm quoting. I didn't make these things up. Mother of all sanctions. That's what they called it. We're hitting you with this, and then we're sanctioning oligarchs, we're sanctioning industries, we're sanctioning companies, we're sanctioning the whole country, we're sanctioning. And it was the biggest program of sanctions. There are thousands of sanctions right now on Russia. But the big one was Europe would stop buying. And to drive the point, the oil and gas, and to drive the point home, remember? They blew up the undersea cable, the undersea gas pipeline, right? An extraordinary action to stop the Russians from exporting their number one moneymaker. That was going to bring them to their knees. The president said so. What wasn't calculated was that the Russians have a way to avoid the impact of the sanctions. Not the usual way, because sanctions are quite easy to evade. There's a book, I forget the author's name, but there's a book, a few years old, which is a study of sanctions. And the whole point of the book is to show you, done by some academic professor somewhere in the United States here, the whole point of the book is to show you that the sanctions never work. Country after country he goes to, it's very good analysis. Anyway, it's not that. The mistake made by Biden and his people was not to understand the importance of China and its allies, known as the BRICS. You know, Belgium, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the dozen other countries that are now part of that. What Russia did is say, okay, I don't have to sell it to you. I'm going to sell it to India and China. End of you lose. My money is coming in. Here's the joke. When you sell it to India, it just goes on another ship and goes right back to Europe. Russia's still selling its oil to Europe. It's just a
new middleman.
Yeah, but the beauty, they never understood, because they didn't understand. They didn't understand that if you don't handle intellectually the change in the world, you're going to make catastrophic strategic mistakes. They lost the war in Ukraine. Russia now occupies a quarter of that country. They lost because the sanctions didn't work. And they didn't work because you didn't understand what this new configuration of the world economy is. So your sanctions aren't going to work. They're not going to work for 5 minutes. They don't even have to sneak around. They got these two monster countries. China and the BRICS is 55, I believe, % of the world's people. The United States has 4.5% of the world's people. You can't overcome that. That's just light, that's light and day or whatever. It's just, you gotta face this. You can't pretend you are not in the 1960s and 70s. You're just not. But we live in a country of, as my psychotherapist wife says, denial. And what we got is a country and a leadership that is committed deep down to denial. It's like watching the Europeans now. They couldn't defeat the Russians with the Americans backing them up. The Americans have now pulled out, and they're babbling to one another how they're going to do it. That's a joke, not even a good one. That's a joke. That's so pathetic. It's painful. It's embarrassing to watch you talk. Keir Starmer, a relatively new prime minister in England, is wanting to send troops to Ukraine. You want to go down in history as the shortest prime minister ever? You do that, you idiot. What? What is it? Yeah, these are not stupid people. I don't mean idiot in that way. It's just, this is an idiotic. It's like the Hail Mary pass. We can do better than that. We are not in the last 2 seconds. We are not. Don't do that. Don't. There's no need for this. But nobody asked that question. Everybody's enthralled with, going to hit them with a tariff. And going to raise the tariff. Yesterday he did yet another unbelievably crazy thing. You know about TikTok. TikTok is Chinese, and Mr. Trump has said he won't tolerate them being Chinese, which is a topic in and of itself, but let's leave that. And the deadline for them to stop being Chinese is the 5th of April, which is coming up. But they haven't cut a deal yet. The Chinese, the hope was that American company would come in and get them for a cheap price because they're under the gun. They have to sell. Chinese are they're used to this. They're much smarter than that. So there's no deal yet. And there may not be one. And Mr. Trump begins to realize he's at the wrong end of this. Because if the Chinese are smart, they'll kill TikTok. And they'll say to the 20 million Americans who use it, you know who deprived you of your TikTok? The orange man. Someone told him yesterday or the day before, you're going to screw yourself here, Donald. They're going to go out. They'll reset it and call it Lick Lock 2 weeks later, and they'll have all the names. They have everything they need. They'll just move them, and the whole game will start all over again. Or they'll find an intermediary, some obscure Norwegian company, and make them the intermediary. All of this is being done, I'm sure. All taken care of. You're going to get screwed, Donald. So 4 days ago, Donald goes on the air and says the only thing he could say. I'm not going to impose the April 5th deadline. If a deal can be worked out, though, in the days and weeks following, I might take the tariffs off of China. Do you understand? What he's teaching everybody, even though it'll take him a long time to learn, is that this is all a game.
Real fast and loose.
Yeah. And I'm playing as fast and loose as I know how. I realize, oh shit, this is going to come back and bite me. I got to do something. So what can I give the Chinese to back away from doing what they're about to do to me? Because more important for the Chinese than TikTok, no matter how many billions it's worth, is destroying the political base of Mr. Trump by depriving Americans of TikTok and blaming him for it, which they will be able to do. Wow. Now, he didn't think that through. Just like he didn't think through how sanctions could not work in the Ukraine situation. He didn't. The only other explanation, besides the chaos of all this, is if there's a method in the madness, if there's some strategic objective. And I have heard one. I don't buy it, but I might be wrong, and maybe it's true. I'll tell you that if you want. That he is, in fact, the prisoner of Mr. Putin. And that somehow making a mess here is the point. If it were the objective to do that, he's doing it.
You think that
No,
Putin could have something?
I don't believe that that's correct. I don't agree with that. But I've heard it. And look, it's like everything else. It's a symptom to hear it, whether it's true or not. And I don't think it is. I certainly don't know that it is. But that people are thinking that it's thoughtful. It's the intellectual effort to say, this is so bizarre and unusual that I need to think, why would this be? Don't get caught in the weeds. Why is the totality? An awful lot of Americans pick up the newspaper waiting each day for what Mr. Trump is going to say that's sort of outrageous or extreme or provocative. What is that? Could be his personal style. Yeah, okay. Even then, if you believe that, why are we having that now? We haven't had that for a long time, if ever. But what is this? So, I'm sure people will come up with more and less far-fetched, because the situation is far-fetched. I don't blame people for coming up with these sorts of speculations, because it is provocative. You want to understand it. I want to understand. I wish I had an explanation. If you say to me, why is this whole thing happening? Well, I tell you my story of a declining empire. I think that does a good bit of putting these things together into a coherent argument. So I use it. Makes sense to me. I don't do the Putin story. That's American, demonization of your enemies and all of that. It's not that I like Mr. Putin. There's nothing to do with that. But I'm looking for explanations. When people offer one, I listen.
One of the amazing things, though, that comes out of these interviews is the tangents are often gems, and I can't resist one other one before we get back to the other stuff. And it's that, and I think it's actually could be relevant to the discussion at hand. And we've never spoken about Hitler on the show, and I think it would be interesting to hear, given the current environment maybe in the background, if there is a simple story, because obviously it's a complicated thing, but how it was that Hitler came to power in Germany.
Yeah, I'll be glad to give you a thumbnail overview of it. But let me start by telling you I think it is immediately applicable to the United States. And the way I tell you the story, I think you'll see how that works. If not, I'll make it explicit.
We can do both.
Yes. The German, think of it this way. In the 19th century, the dominant player in the global economy was Britain. It is the century of the British Empire, of whom it was said, the sun never sets on the British Empire, because wherever the sun is going down, there's Britain, and wherever it's coming up, there's another part of Britain, right? India was the great gem, but British Empire included parts of Latin America, large parts of Africa, large parts of Asia, and so forth. Not to speak of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and all the rest of it. But there were two up-and-coming challengers to the British Empire across the 19th century. One was the United States, the ex-colony of Britain, and the other was Germany. These two countries were capitalists, understood that Britain was the one to beat if you're going to make it. I don't think either of them aspired to replace the British Empire, but the thought crossed their mind, and it was a delicious thought. You have the United States, the Monroe Doctrine, we're going to take over Latin America is ours. Wow. Colonial dreams. Like taking Greenland, say, or Panama, or making Canada the 51st state, that sort of thing. And Germany had a notion of it really being a challenger to Britain. The German word Reich Das Reich in German, is empire in English, roughly. Hitler was going to create the Third Reich. That's what he called his project. They had had two earlier Reichs, the empire. The Germans had, for example, large chunks of Africa that they had colonized in the south, in the east, in the west. They had a piece of China. They had colonies in Asia and so forth. So they were trying to develop. In Germany, they were mostly successful, as they were in the United States. They not only grew dramatically, but Germany wasn't really a country until the second half of the 19th century. Before that, it was broken up into little principalities. So the United States had a bit of an edge because it was one country from Atlantic to Pacific, pretty much by the middle of the 19th century. The big thing that hampered the United States was the Civil War. The big thing that hampered the Germans was the unification, which is lots of little wars with France, with Denmark, and the different pulling together under a charismatic leader, Bismarck by name in Germany. But with the end of the Civil War, the 1860s, and by around roughly that time, a little later in Europe, you had these two powers had come together and were independent, had solved their divisions, north-south with the United States, the defeat of the South, and in the case of Germany, the defeat of those who opposed German unification, chief of which were the French. And they were defeated. In 1870, they were defeated. And I believe you and I have discussed it. The defeat by the Germans of the French opened a moment for the left to have an opportunity. That's the Paris Commune of 1871. Okay. In Germany, the experience here was spectacular. Instead of feeling to be way below the British. The British were rich first. The British had the biggest empire. The British were the center of power. The world used the pound sterling as its currency, all of that. Germany always had an inferiority complex. So they went to work to develop quickly. So from 1860 to the end of the century, 1900, German economic development is spectacular, outgrowing the British Empire, despite the empire being still intact. But they were really, as the United States had its boost of development after 1860, building the railroads and everything else in the West. A whole middle class develops in Germany around the success of their capitalism. A working class, for sure, but a real bourgeoisie in the way remember, Germany is feudal much longer than Britain or France is. Feudalism stays strong in Eastern Europe relative to Western as it dies. Long story short, and here's the point. By 1914, Germany is a real successful powerhouse, an exploding economic success, people, middle-class people living extraordinarily prosperous lives. If you ever want to understand it, the novels of Thomas Mann, M-A-N-N, Buddenbrooks, and others capture that better than any sociology can. And the working class, which was the first working class to develop a real socialist movement on a mass scale, not so surprising, Marx was German, so they picked up on him. Very successful, powerful enough that Bismarck made deals with the had to. So you had an organized, confident working class. who attributed their success not so much to the success of capitalism, but to the success of the Socialist Party in getting a piece of that activity for the working class. Very confident, very proud, and quite rich, saving money. For the Germans, very frugal. Very frugal. So they remembered the hard times before unity. It was clearer for them. And so they think the world is their oyster. They have an empire. It's productive for them. It brings them wealth, and then they have an absolutely crushing experience. All of this is under an emperor. In German, the word is Kaiser, like Tsar or something. Kaiser Wilhelm was the one in power at the time. And he leads them into World War I. They're going to win that battle like they've been winning everything else. They lose. World War I, horrific, the most devastating, destroying factories, railroads, everything, killing immense numbers of people in trench warfare, terribly destructive. But most important and cataclysmic for them, they lose. And now, very quickly, a 1-2-3 punch. After the war, the Versailles Treaty, which ends World War I, imposes reparations on Germany. The winners are going to make the loser pay for the war. And so Germany is required to devote a huge portion of its resources not to build up Germany after the terrible war, but to pay back the French and the British. And the French and the British insist on being paid. Why? Because to fight World War I, they had borrowed from the United States. That's why the United States becomes the world power, right there. It funded the World War that crushed its enemies or its potential competitors, and consequently the United States becomes the power because no war was fought here, no World War I.
No destruction.
No destruction. Relatively smaller number of people involved. World War II wasn't fought here either, except for Pearl Harbor. So you have it again. But before we get to that, here now comes the thing. So the Germans are, after World War I, utterly impoverished. If you want to get an idea of a society destroyed by this experience, then the thing you want to do is look at the painting, look at the literature, look at the well, two names I'll give. George Gross, if you're at all familiar with the paintings of George Gross, that's painting Germany in the 20s after the loss of World War I. The country's flooded with wounded soldiers.
Is this degenerate art?
Yeah. And the greatest theater producer probably in the whole century, Bertolt Brecht, writing in Berlin in the aftermath of this horrible, horrible war. Okay, they can't recover because they're funding the British and the French, who are using the money to repay the Americans. It's destroying what's left of Germany. The shock of the war, then the shock of losing the war, now the shock of being unable to recover. Where does it lead? It culminates the war is over in 1918. In 1923, 5 years later, Germany experiences the worst inflation in modern human history. In a matter of 8 months, the currency goes from 4 or 5 Deutschmark, that's the name of their currency, to $1, to 5 billion Deutschmark.
That's crazy.
Yeah. My parents lived through that. My mother told me stories in which her parents, she lived in Berlin, her father would run home from his job at noon, grab a sandwich prepared by my grandmother, my mother's mother, because he would give her a little bag full of banknotes of money, and then run back to his job. She would run to the market to spend the money, because if she waited till the evening, the money wouldn't be worth anything anymore.
And we think we've got it bad now. And it's bad now.
But now here comes the punchline. The Germans were frugal. For the previous 50 years of their spectacular growth and prosperity, they had saved up money. With the money saved by 2 generations over 50 years, they could now purchase a quarter pound of butter. They were wiped out. They couldn't handle it. 5 years later, in 1929, the stock market crashed and we entered the Great Depression. That means you hammered the German working class with a war, a loss of the war, the worst inflation ever, and the worst depression in capitalism's history, all in a 12 or 13-year period. It was too much, and they went crazy. And the proof of it is they turned to a non-German, non-blue-eyed blonde, non-tall person from Austria and said, "You will save us." Adolf Hitler. When does he take power? January of 1933. Right after he collects the catastrophe. In the last 2 elections of 1932, before he takes office, the country split right down the middle. Half went to the old German middle-of-the-road political parties, and the other half split between the Socialist Party and the Communist Party. And the business community held a meeting, of which there are records, which I used in my writing. What are we going to do? Both sides denounced capitalism on the grounds it had brought war. It had been responsible for the reparation. That's why Hitler had to call his fascist party socialist. It's the National Socialist Party. He had to tap into anti-capitalism, otherwise he wouldn't have got to first base. Nazi, N-A-Z-I, that's the first 4 letters of the German word National, which simply means national. It's the National Socialist Party. So it's Nazi Party against the socialists and communists. And those were fights in the streets. They were fights at the ballot box. The business community realized the country's dissolving into 2 wings. We have to make a choice. And they went with Hitler. And they turned to Hindenburg, the president of Germany at the time, and told him, "You have to invite Hitler to form a government." That's what they did. That's how it happened. Why is it similar? Now, here's the parallel. For the last 30 to 40 years in this country, there's been an income and wealth redistribution. Anybody who studies that, left-winger, right-winger, except for a few on the right, understand this. You can take a look at the Gini coefficient. You can take a look at all this status from the IRS and all the rest. We have moved wealth from the bottom and the middle in this country to the top. That's why even our candidates talk about the middle class is dying, the middle class is going. Yeah, that's right. The middle has fallen out, number 1. Number 2, you subjected them after this kind of a thing to a pandemic, which really shook them up, an inflation, which shook them up, still shakes them up, and a serious diminution in your position in the world. You have, over the last 30 to 40 years, you lost the war in Vietnam, you lost the war in Afghanistan, you lost the war in Iraq, and you are losing the war in Ukraine. too many things are happening. And the working class is hit in too many ways. It's upset, it's angry, it doesn't see a way out. That's a description of the German working class. That's why it went with Hitler. Enough, not all of it by a long shot, but enough of it to give him the chance to get rid of all of his enemies and reshape Germany. That ought to strike a chord. This morning's headline, this morning, 28th March 2025, the headline when I opened my news was that President Trump has appointed Vice President Vance to remove from the Smithsonian Institute the anti-American improper ideology. What the hell is that? What is that? You know what the first thing that comes to my mind? In the 1950s here in America, we had something called the Un-American Activities Committee in the House of Representatives that hounded people out of their jobs and their positions because they held views that a collection of congressmen, many from the South, held to be un-American. Now, we've come to regret that. That's McCarthyism, but that's what they did. By the way, among the people who left the United States because they were hounded by this committee for their ideas were Bertolt Brecht, Charlie Chaplin. I could go on. That's one of the reasons we came, I thought, to understand what an aberrant, horrible period this was. We understood nothing. We're just doing it again. Will the outcome be the same? I don't know. Maybe they'll win this time. Maybe we won't have what happened in the 50s. We'll have what happened in Germany in the 30s. But the story in Germany of a working class that was shocked. The American working class was told that America was the king of the hill, which coming out of World War II, we were. And that this was just, it was the way it was, American exceptionalism, the uniqueness. God loves us, whatever the form in which you celebrated it. But nobody here was prepared that it would come to an end. That for the first time in a century, we actually have an economic competitor called China. We never had it. Russia, I think I told you this before, Russia was never, Soviet Union was not an economic competitor. It was way too poor, way too small. Even today, the American GDP is $29 trillion. Russian GDP, $3 trillion. This is David and Goliath. But David minus the slingshot. You know, what? They have military, they have nuclear weapons. I shouldn't say minus the slingshot. Here's a slingshot. But it's still David with a slingshot. China's 18 or 19 trillion. That's a serious competitor. The two together, now you're talking. And they understand it. And so do the folks here. But not the American people. They must be kept innocent of all of this. Except when they leak their materials to the Atlantic magazine.